Hello and welcome to Bird Brains, the YouTube channel devoted to all things avian. I'm Lev Perikian, amateur bird watcher and author of Why Do Birds Suddenly Disappear and the instigator of the Twitter Birdsong Project. And I'm joined, as always, by David Darrell Lambert, professional ornithologist and author of Birdwatching London. David, hello, how are you?
Yeah, hi, I'm great. You?
I'm pretty well, thanks very much. It's not quite as warm as I thought it was going to be, but I have come prepared in the shirt department, which I'm afraid you don't seem to have done. So I think I'm calling this a win this week.
I'll give you that one then.
Okay, so we're 1-1, I reckon, at least 1-1. How's your week been? Has there been anything exciting in the bird department down your way?
Well, I was reading this morning about woodcocks globally and how the main population is in Russia and that loads winter in the UK up to, I think it's something like 1.4 million or something crazy like that. And yet we shoot loads of them. And so unsurprisingly, their numbers are starting to decrease.
Who'd have thought?
I know.
Extraordinary. Yeah. Woodcocks are a funny bird. They're sort of dumpy little game bird type things, aren't they? They have that extraordinary display that they do at dusk in the summer. Yeah, it's called roding, isn't it?
Yeah, they fly around like bombers, going low over the trees, going disc, disc, as they charge the back.
Do that sound again, please.
Disc, disc, kind of thing.
Very much. We'll be able to recognise that later on in this one. They're also a bird that I think sometimes I've seen people post photographs of dazed birds that have flown into windows into weird places like in the city of London or very urban places. So they obviously travel over and get confused and hit things. Is that quite a common thing?
Yeah, it does happen quite a lot. I've seen quite a few videos of sometimes dead ones, some of them walking around. There was one, I think, around Fenchurch Street or Liverpool Street last autumn, just walking along the pavement. So these sort of odd things do happen. Birds are migrating all the time. And there was a photograph someone sent me of a water rail on someone's window ledge in an office building. Yeah. And then best of all, this week I got sent a video of a Dartford warbler in someone's back garden in Belsize Grove.
Fantastic. Dartford warbler is not normally a bird of the back garden, you'd say. You expect them more on heaths and I mean, they're like gorse, and we've got some gorse up on our common, but
it was hopping around the plant pots, so it was like nowhere near anything normal.
Completely lost. So
I've got to get some plant pots for the garden for
Dartford warblers will definitely be turning up in their droves, definitely. But it does go to show that you can see anything pretty much anywhere at any time. So you just have to keep your eyes and ears open. I suppose in our local excitement has not been much, but we do have great tits nesting. I'm just going to go up. You probably can't see that. Anyway, good camera angle. Great nesting in the Swift box up on our thing, underneath our roof. And they are just about to fledge. I think the noises have become more and more insistent in the last couple of days, and the parents have become more and more busy going back and forth. So that's a little bit of minor excitement. But your mention of woodcock migration leads us neatly onto this week's subject, which is migration. It's one of those things that when I first got interested in birding, it completely confused me and I had no idea what was going on. So I thought we'd just try and answer some of the questions, even though I know that there are a lot of grey areas. But I suppose we've just had one major migration season, haven't we? When would you say the main migrating seasons are for birds to and from the UK?
I would say if we start off the spring basically covers sort of like March, April, and a little bit into May. It trails off, but you get a mixture of different species at different times, so it's very hard to be very precise. Yeah. And then in the autumn, it's sort of like August through to about October is a real nice big period of migration as well.
Right, so that we're talking about birds and in the spring, birds coming here, mostly a lot of them coming here from Africa. Yeah. To spend the summer here and breed. And we're talking about birds that we talked about last week, the martins and swallows and swifts, but also a load of warblers, the things like nightingale and cuckoos and birds of prey like osprey and hobby.
ducks and geese as well are going to be migrating. So the earlier part of the migration, like the March time, is a lot of wildfowl moving out of the UK or further south, heading sort of like north and east and maybe even a bit west to go and breed somewhere else. And then in the autumn, we've got stuff moving across, and then some of it will stay and some of it will head further south. So stuff that often turns up earlier on, like in August, more than likely is going to be moving further south, including into September. And then when you hit October, we'll get more of the winter stuff coming in, which is potentially going to stay around our shores or in our countryside and gardens for a longer duration.
Yeah, yeah. And again, also that time, the September, October time is when the summer birds head back to Africa. That's a fairly straightforward one, isn't it? That it's one line from there. But we also then get things like redwing and fieldfare coming in from Scandinavia to overwinter here. So there's migration going on a lot of the time. I think nearly all the time. There's something is on the move to somewhere.
Yeah.
So it can get quite confusing, as well as, and then you'll also get things that are just odd vagrants that turn up at odd times in what might feel like the wrong place.
Yeah.
So there's stuff going on all the time. Why do birds migrate? Very easy question. Over to you for the next quarter of an hour.
So it's mainly to do with food and breeding. So if you imagine you're a robin and you're breeding up in Scandinavia, in the sort of like May, June, July, loads of food, fairly warm kind of weather. As soon as it starts hitting September, October, temperatures are going to get lower. We're going to get frost and stuff like that. A lot of snow in Scandinavia. So I think like a robin obviously can't survive very well in those sort of conditions. So they peg it south. So we get lots of thrushes moving out and ducks and wildfowl out of places like Russia, Northern Europe, and they're going to be heading south, sometimes going southwest into the UK and further to warmer climes to be able to survive and continue on. And on the flip side, you've got summer migrants like our swallows who are turning up here in house mines, who are feeding here during the summer months, raising their young, and then they head back into Southern Europe, and some will go even further down into Africa to spend the summer as well. And we look at something like a common tern. Common tern does something crazy, like they may breed up in Scotland, then they fly all the way south in the autumn, down to South Africa. Some of the tern species even wander into the Indian Ocean, then come all the way back up to breed in Northern Europe again, doing sort of like 60,000 kilometers in a year, which is a huge amount of stuff.
Extraordinary amount, isn't it? And presumably it has to be worth it for them, because otherwise they'd just stay put. So it's expending a lot of energy, all this movement, but they're going to where the conditions are better for them to survive and to breed.
Yeah, indeed. And in some species, like I'm sure it's swallows, some swallows will move south and then have a brood down there and then come back up again. Yeah. I'm sure it was one of the swallows in North America was doing that. I can't remember if it's a European ones or not.
Right, yeah.
But that's like even crazier to do like double broods and that sort of thing.
Yeah. Extraordinary. But obviously evolutionary reasons mean that that is the best way for the species to procreate and survive. You mentioned the robin there. I think that's a bird that a lot of people just think of as a garden bird that stays put. So you see, people have said, "Oh, we've had this robin coming to our feeder for 6 or 7 years. It's the same robin." So firstly, it isn't the same robin, is it? Because they only live for about 18 months, 2-3 years at most. And that the populations of things like robins and blackbirds will be added to by what you mentioned, the birds coming from the sort of continental Europe, Scandinavia and the Netherlands even. So there's as well as those huge sweeps of migration with birds like the Arctic tern and the ones you mentioned, there's a lot of local migration going on that we probably don't know the details of.
No, that's right. I mean, we're hitting all sorts of different things here. So
look
at the robin,
a big subject.
Yeah, but if you look at the robin potentially will have 3 broods. Each brood could be 6. That's 18 young. So they have a really high mortality rate, because if they all survived, every day we'll be sweeping robins away from our down the footpath garden. They'll be everywhere. But the trouble is that with the robin, they all look the same. So you've got birds that come out of Northern Europe and then come to our country. Some will stay and some will move further south. And some of our robins migrate as well. And some are resident as well. And because they all look the same, you've got no idea, really. It's almost impossible.
So we know this from the science of ringing, presumably, that as we can touch on that, the technology. Ringing has been around for a long time, and the process is that you put up nets and the birds fly into them, and you take them and weigh them and take all their details, and you put a little metal band on their leg and then release them.
Yeah.
Hope that somebody else somewhere doing a similar project, or maybe you later on in the year or the following year, will come across the same bird again, and you'll be able to tell where it's gone and what it's done. That's broadly what it is, yeah.
Yeah, indeed. And now we've got even better technology. So we have GPS trackers that they can put onto birds. And they've now got special devices where at ringing stations, there are these transmitters that will that pick up the signal from smallest chips on the robins, so they can track them individually. So there was a robin that left, I think it was the Netherlands last autumn, and it took only 4 hours to fly to the Suffolk coast. So it gives you an idea on how far these birds could potentially migrate. So like something coming out of Northern Europe, even maybe in Russia, potentially is going to hit sort of like the west coast of Europe, even Britain, in one night.
That's astonishing. I mean, actually, somebody asked me the other day, how long does it take a swift to get from Africa to Britain? And I had no idea. I assumed it would be a couple of weeks, but they can do it. They can do it quicker than that, yeah.
Potentially, yeah. I mean, the trouble is, it all depends on what they're doing. You know, how much are they feeding up and that sort of thing.
And also, what kind of weather they might run into on the way. They might be held up by storms or whatever.
Yeah. And of course, some birds will push through this sort of thing because they don't realise it's not that energy efficient, and others will hang around and stay. And they may also get caught out in these weather conditions. And if we look at really crazy migration, about a decade ago, they GPS tracked a bar-tailed godwit, which is a small wading bird about that big, something like that, a bit smaller than a curlew. And it was ringed in Alaska, and the GPS tracking device was only meant to last 6 months, but it lasted a whole year.
Yeah.
So it flew from Alaska all the way down to New Zealand non-stop. It's like 11,000 kilometers in something crazy like 9 days. And you just think, wow, they thought they stopped off on all these islands on the way down, but this bird just went for it. So some of these birds are putting on lots of fat to build up to do these big migrations. Some of them will double in weight. So then they do this big migration, and it spent the winter in New Zealand, and then it was lazy because it only flew to China on the way back.
Lightweight.
And waited there for a week, and then flew all the way back to Alaska.
That's simply astonishing. There's so many things, the more I learn about birds and nature in general, that make you just want to go, what?
I know. And then we complain about having to walk somewhere, and you think, well, these birds are actually flying thousands of miles.
Yeah, and they're only yay big.
Yeah.
So that thing about fat is that, of course, one of the things you discover from weighing birds at the ringing station is how likely they are to get far on their migration, or whether they're about to leave, whether they're fattened enough to go on these journeys. There's quite a difference, even from day to day and from hour to hour, in the weight of these birds.
Yeah, I mean, I know that when they ring the birds, they often, if I remember correctly, they blow on the belly to feel how much fat deposit is underneath. Yeah. So then they can rate it, and it gives them an idea of, whether or not they're building up to do migration or not, that sort of thing.
Yeah. That's really fascinating. Anything else we can talk about with migration? I mean, there's so much, but I think we've confused people enough already. Thinking about the oh my God, nature is amazing aspect of things. Somebody posted something on Twitter last night which I wanted to share, and I'm going to try and do that. So let's just see if the technology works. Share screen, Safari unknown, share. Here we go. So this is a nest box, and you can see on the bottom right-hand corner, I think you should be able to see a blue tit. Can you see it?
Yeah.
Excellent. So blue tit, and then the gapes of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 or so chicks. Which is the stimulus for them to feed. Yeah. And look at this. In comes another bird, which is a wren, a little bit smaller, and actually you can see the eye stripe when it's not there. And what it's done is it's brought in some food, and it's fed. There's the other blue tit parent, but the wren has come in. It's on loop, and it's feeding the blue tit chicks, which is not something I know about at all. But you're more familiar with these things than I am. Is that something that happens a lot, or is it a one-off?
It's quite unusual. Often you see stuff like a great tit or a blue tit helping the other species feed its young. So for some reason, I don't know exactly how that works, but a blue tit decides it's going to feed the young great tits, and that happens. But for a completely different family to join in, that's very unusual. I've not heard of that before.
And presumably, would it be that the wren is in the kind of feeding mode itself, so it's got its own family on the way, therefore it's thinking of doing that, or who knows?
I don't know. I mean, we go into the realms of, is this like genetically designed in them that this time of year they think about feeding young? Or are we looking at potentially maybe a wren's nested in a similar nest box or that nest box earlier and hasn't realised all its young has fledged and just keeps doing the same thing? I don't know. I mean,
maybe its own its own brood has failed, perhaps, and that it's decided, I've got all this energy to feed things. Who knows? It's fascinating behaviour anyway, and I was quite blown away by it, frankly. So there you go. So David, thank you so much as always. Always great to catch up with you. And we've got things underneath where you can subscribe, or you can buy us a coffee if you like what we do, because we like coffee. And we'll be back next week. I think we might look at finches next week. How's that for an idea?
That sounds good.
Excellent. Thanks very much indeed. See you next week.
Bye.
Bye.